Welcome to today's important topic of violence against women during the COVID-19 pandemic, tackling the shadow pandemic. My name is Monika Fröhler, and I'm the CEO of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, and it is my privilege to moderate today's event. As you are surely aware, since the outbreak of COVID-19, emerging data and reports from people from the front lines have shown that all types of violence against women and girls, particularly domestic violence, has increased. We are talking about a serious shadow pandemic. What we do need is a global effort to stop it. And therefore, the Ban Ki-moon Center is hosting today's high-level roundtable. Former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has been a champion for women's rights and the Orange the World campaign since its start. It is my sincere honor and privilege to introduce to you our first speaker of today's event, former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, co-chair of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, CEO Monika Fröhler, Right Honorable Helen Clark, Regional Director of UN Women Asia Pacific, Mr. Mohammad Naciri, CEO of Avon, Ms. Angela Cretu, founder of SheSays, Ms. Trisha Shetty, and Honorable President Heinz Fischer, co-chairman of BKMC Center, and to all the members of the audience, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. It is a great honor and pleasure for me to speak to you today. The coronavirus pandemic prevents us from meeting in person, but thankfully, we can draw on technological resources that allow us to gather here today. What primarily connects all of us here, however, is not technology, but it is our common dedication to eliminating violence against women and girls in all its forms. I'd like to warmly welcome all of you for today's special event addressing this very pressing issue that requires a global multi-stakeholder response. What we have seen in the past few months has truly been outside the ordinary. No one was able to expect just a year ago how much of our lives could change in a matter of days, weeks, and months. It has clearly been challenging times, but it has also been a time to focus. The coronavirus pandemic allowed us to see and react to the many global challenges that our time is facing. The virus has exacerbated some of the most life-threatening circumstances. The reason we gather here today is because we have seen how the pandemic has increased the threat and reality of violence for millions of women and girls in confinement. UN Women has aptly called this effect of the pandemic on violence against women and girls the shadow pandemic. Every 1 in 3 women experiences sexual or physical violence at least once in their life. And this was the case even before COVID-19 hit. Domestic violence, cyber violence, and exploitative grooming of children has become an increased hazard for millions of women and girls, as we were and still are witnessing in lockdowns, social distancing, and other restrictions. As a global community, we must not look away. We must publicly condemn this disastrous development of increased violence against women and girls that numerous countries have been witnessing. One thing is clear: violence against women and girls does not only affect the victim, it impacts the entire society throughout multiple generations. This emphasizes that we must engage in an open dialogue and bring all stakeholders to the table. International organizations, public and private sector, academia and science, media, civil society, and youth. Every field and every sector must be involved. I commend UN Women on its extensive work to document the multidimensional effects of the COVID-19 regulations on violence against women and girls. It is more important than ever that we can draw on reliable data translated into comprehensive charts and reports gathered in a central and trustworthy open source location. I am grateful that we received a special message by Madam Executive Director of UN Women, Honorable Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, who could not be with us live today due to the time difference. I'd like to thank her for her valuable contribution, which underscores the importance of today's event. Yesterday, on the 25th of November, we commemorated the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. We are now in the midst of the annual 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, also known as the Orange the World campaign. During this time, the world shines bright in orange, symbolizing a brighter future and the determination and courage that is needed to end violence against women and girls. The Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, which I co-chair with my dear friend, President Heinz Fischer, has made it one of its main quests to build a bridge and a platform of dialogue between high-level decision makers and young change makers. The primary goal of our organization is to contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, by empowering women and youth to act as global citizens. Violence against women and girls is one of the most pervasive human rights violations and perhaps the most obvious manifestation of the deep imbalances in power in our societies. How will we ever achieve SDGs if women and girls around the world, in every country, still struggle to exercise their full human rights? The time to act is now. We cannot keep silent while women and girls around the world must deal with the repercussions of COVID-19 in a much more drastic way than men. That is why I'm particularly proud that we have gained the support of such an esteemed panel here today to discuss how we can effectively tackle this shadow pandemic. I am very thankful to all our speakers for lending their powerful voice and unique perspective to this essential global movement, and thus contributing to the Orange the World campaign. Only with such an international cross-sectoral approach can we find solutions that sustainably work to eliminate violence against women and girls. I also want to thank everyone in the audience for showing your interest and support here today. I challenge you all to take action and address this issue whenever and wherever you can. No matter how small or large the activity may be, this shadow pandemic needs all of our helping hands. I look forward to this discussion and to observing what will emerge from it. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you.
Dear SG Ban, thanks so much for these inspirational words. They mean a lot to all of us. Thank you so much. Yes, indeed, more needs to be done to prioritize the addressing of violence against women and girls. Everyone has a role to play, as you so well put it. Someone who has done always his utmost to support women and fight against violence in all forms and against injustice is the former President of the Republic of Austria, co-chair of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, Dr. Heinz Fischer. Your Excellency, Dr. Heinz Fischer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Monica. Hello, everybody, in particular, Your Excellency Helen Clark, my good friend Ban Ki-moon, esteemed Director Mohammad Naciri, dear Mrs. Cretu and Mrs. Shetty, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to see you all and to communicate with you today. As co-chair of the Ban Ki-moon Center, we are happy to bring together stakeholders from politics, from the private sector, international and civil society organizations, and others for a common cause. This year has really been marked by the COVID-19 pandemic, which exposed existing and deep-rooted social inequalities, such as the lack of access to healthcare and education, low income employment, and gender inequality. Yesterday, we kicked off the 2020 Orange the World campaign and are going to mobilize efforts and raise awareness against gender-based violence in the coming day, and in the coming days and the coming year. Violence against women and girls is a human rights issue, as Ban Ki-moon just has said. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights reads, I quote, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights." Quotation end. This is a wonderful sentence. But women experiencing physical or sexual violence, however, are being deprived of their right to live a safe and dignified life. It was only in 1993 that violence against women in public and private life was recognized as a human rights obligation by the Vienna Declaration, requiring legislative, administrative, and institutional measures to eradicate gender stereotypes which perpetuate gender-based violence. Women constitute half of the world population, and they can only actively contribute to society and the economy when living autonomous and violent-free lives. This is why empowering women and girls is at the core of Ban Ki-moon Center's mandate. Through our 4 pillars of leadership, mediation, advocacy, and education, the Center aims at transmitting SDG knowledge, 21st century skills, and global citizen values to women and youth to live in a peaceful and prosperous world. Since 2019, we intensified our activities against gender-based violence and joined the Austrian Steering Committee of the Orange the World campaign together with UN Women Austria, So Optimist International Austria, and He4She Austria. For the second year in a row, The National Committee highlights institutions who are directly dealing with victims suffering from violence, namely institutions such as hospitals, justice and police administration, forensics, etc. We are gathered here today to discuss also the so-called shadow pandemic, which we are witnessing since the first lockdowns came to force in March this year. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon already rightly pointed out the spike in domestic violence, cyber violence, and exploitative grooming of children that millions of women and girls are experiencing. Furthermore, the coronavirus crisis, which is pushing the world's economy into a recession, may also ultimately make it more difficult for victims to leave abusive relationships. We can and must not longer stand by and stay silent. We have to talk about the changing dynamics of violence against women during COVID-19. What can we all do to prevent, protect and support women and girls during periods of quarantine, social distancing and other measures? How can we learn from best practice examples and implement them in our countries? What is the role of various sectors and stakeholders in the global effort to eliminate violence against women? Our most competent speakers of today's high-level roundtable will touch upon these pressing questions and will spotlight their endeavors in tackling the shadow pandemic. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals give also a roadmap on how to successfully empower women and girls and serve as a nexus for the elimination of gender-based violence. Access to protective and medical services, which we can link to SDG 3, good health and well-being, economic independency from the abusive partner, see SDG 8, access to legal advice and judiciary action, SDG 16, namely peace, justice and strong institutions, or global and multi-stakeholder efforts, SDG 17, partnership for all these goals, constitute exemplary steps towards adequate prevention, protection, and liability. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm looking forward to the interesting and multidisciplinary discussion and would like to thank everyone who joined here today. Only solidarity, empathy, and the real will for action can turn this shadow pandemic around and give women and girls the rights and dignity they deserve. Thank you, lots of success, and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Fischer, for your words of wisdom. Indeed, COVID-19 meant that our health services were already under strain and that essential services sometimes were falling short, and at the same time domestic violence was increasing, shelters and helplines were overwhelmed and have reached capacity. UN Women is at the forefront of providing up-to-date information and supporting vital programs to fight violence against women. UN Women draws the attention of the world exactly on that issue via the Orange the World campaign and the 16 days of action. Prevent, protect, respond are the mottos this year. And it is therefore my real pleasure to announce a video statement of Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, Executive Director of UN Women. Spotlight on UN Women, please.
Excellency, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, former UN Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As we mark the day to end violence against women and girls, and as we orange the world this year, our work is even much harder and more urgent. We have seen the close connection between COVID-19 pandemic and the further rise of all kinds of violence against women and girls. We called it the shadow pandemic. We've also seen two types of response. There's a response for citizens who present with this life-threatening illness, and another response for those who come for help with a life-threatening partner. We've seen all hands on deck for the fight against the pandemic with incredible compassion and selfless service by health workers, ordinary people, governments providing changes overnight, shutting borders, massive fiscal injection, industry breakthroughs, and protection protocols backed by determination. We need a comparable amount of determination and effort to be given to the global fight to end violence against women and girls so that we can see results and flatten the curve of this destructive shadow pandemic. No one gains, everyone loses, and we have to turn this around. We now know what it takes to fight a pandemic. Now we need the will to do it. And with Generation Equality and its action coalitions, which include an action coalition to end violence against women, we will lead the way to a world without violence. Thank you, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, for having been part of the leadership that made this focus of 16 days possible, where everyone takes stock of how we are progressing with fighting to end violence against women.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for the technical issues that we had with the sound of the video. We could read the subtitles, but obviously the video will be available, hopefully for all of you later on. We will continue in the program, and I do want to thank UN Women for their engagement. I do want to thank the Executive Director for her statement. Ladies and gentlemen, violence against women and girls is pervasive during normal times, and let alone times of a pandemic. And yet, as it's a product of unequal gender power relations and discrimination in the first place, it is understandable that we have to restrict movements in times of COVID, but I would really like to draw your attention to some of the facts, how the pandemic has worsened the situation. Even before the pandemic, 1 in 3 women worldwide experienced either physical or sexual violence, at least once in their lifetime. We have increased cases of domestic violence now, and the demand for emergency shelters that have been reported in Canada, Germany, Spain, the United Kingdom, and the United States is incredible. We now see often doubling or even tripling of the demand. In France, reports of domestic violence have increased by 30%, and this is data that we know, and there is a lot of data that we unfortunately don't have access to, but the assumption is that we really are looking into a very dire situation. And then let's not forget that there are other forms of violence against women that are already or likely to be severely affected, such as online violence, child marriage, female genital mutilation, and others. So, we have a massive challenge at hand. And maybe to summarize the challenges, I would like to draw on the next slide, please. The challenges that we have at hand are pressures on essential services, increased domestic violence, cyber violence, and obviously restricted movements. But dear audience, we do want to check in with you. We do want to know how you are perceiving the shadow pandemic, and hence allow us to engage you in Mentimeter. For that, I would like the next slide to show to you what we are intending to do. Next slide, please. Please do get out your mobile phones. I think my team is administering the next slide, and I think there are a couple of technical problems, but here it is. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, please do grab your mobile phone and type in www.menti.com, and with that you will be part of an online and real-time query that we are conducting. Please do type in the following code: 84 59 22 1. So I repeat once more, the code can be seen on the top of the page: 84 59 22 1. Join us in our questions. Kindly try to join. I see that 13 people have already joined us, but I also see that we have about 80 participants, and I hope that all of you will lend their voice to our questions. Your answers will be displayed in real time, and yet you are not giving away any privacy data. Rest assured that neither your name or nothing is stored on this one. It's a system where you can type in your answer and you will see your answer in real time on our screens. And I do hope we will soon enter into the panel, but that the panel too is participating and informing themselves of the query that we have. And maybe can I ask my team to switch on my camera again, because I cannot start my video, and it would be nice to have. Excellent. So let's go right away to the first question. Please continue to join. So the code is 84 59 22 1, and it's possible to join at any point in time. We would like to ask you, what are the risks that were exacerbated for women in your region? What are the risks that were exacerbated for women in your region? Give us an insight in what happened in these past months for women in your region? So an increase of domestic violence, we already spoke about that. Access to services was probably more difficult. Mental health issues, that's a big one that has yet to be discussed. Financial difficulties, yes. Rapes, unfortunately. Mental health issues, I see here again. The bigger the word, ladies and gentlemen, you can imagine, the more often it has been mentioned in the answers that you have given. Unemployment is definitely a massive case in point. Poverty. We do have cyber violence. Yeah, difficulties in family planning, income, job loss, financial difficulties. And as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, domestic violence stays at the center of it, which means that out of the 47 people that contributed, this is really one of the most massive problems. Unemployment being second in rank, mental health, I'd say third. Thank you very much. Next question for us that we want to pose to you would be, what are effective tools to tackle the shadow pandemic? So in your region, what have you experienced as effective tools to tackle the shadow pandemic? The frontline services, that helplines remained accessible, awareness raising, yes, awareness, I see that now many times, awareness, understanding mental health, geography challenges, awareness, look how many times the word comes up, wow. And impunity, financial support, the training of health professionals to recognize, response and refer family violence, okay. Participation, interesting, which is difficult obviously in times of lockdown. Risk reporting. Talking with friends, I like that one because we often underestimate the networks that need to be utilized in times of real hazard. Awareness again, hotlines, access to resources, awareness, showing solidarity. Accommodation for women and children fleeing violent partners. So this is definitely an effective tool that has been yet jeopardized at times. Participation, create a safe platform where all women can share their problems and people respond and can help her. Excellent. The state providing childcare, financial aid to women raising children, that's so true. The moment this is guaranteed, the situation becomes less burdensome. Training health professionals. These are fantastic answers, and I'm sure our panel will shed additional light on this. Thank you so much. Yes. Risk reporting and awareness is coming up so many times. And I think this is the call to all of us. Let's continue to talk about it. Let's continue to give it the attention it has absolutely deserved. Thank you. Let's go to our next question before we come to the panel. What are the resources in your countries aimed at preventing violence against women and supporting victims? So what would be the resources that are there for prevention and then also supporting victims? What do you know of? I hope that hotlines come up again. Yes, hotlines, the first one. Women shelters. Unfortunately, this is not the case in all over the globe, but only in some countries. Support hotlines, true. Charity support, Opferschutzgruppen in hospitals, that's definitely coming from the German-speaking world. It's the victim assistance groups. Calling it violence of man. Social advertising campaigns, raising awareness, support for shelters and hotlines. Good governance and law, so the top-down approach needed. Media campaigns, very important. A chatbot, even just a chatbot to support, I think, yeah, that's interesting. Actually, I don't know much about those resources. Also sheds a light about the lack of it, probably. Safe space for women and girls. There are institutions that help. Good governance and law, the sort of top-down. Yeah. 31 of you have commented already. Thank you so much. Networks of women, key point, and we will hear more about that surely from our panel speakers. NGOs help, educational programs help, and legislative reforms. Thank you so much. Yes. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we will ask you to keep your mobile phones ready at hand because we will continue to ask questions. But now it is my privilege and pleasure to introduce to you our stellar panel. Today we are welcoming Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand and UNDP former administrator. We are also welcoming Angela Cretu, Chief Executive Officer of Avon, Mohammad Naciri, a UN Women Regional Director of Asia and Pacific, and the formidable Trisha Shetty, founder of SheSays and women rights activist. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to welcome you all. Thank you so much for joining.
Good morning and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to all of you. I would love to start this discussion on the question of, so how can we tackle the shadow pandemic? How can we actually do that? And I would like to give the floor immediately to you, Helen Clark, to shed a light on what can we do? What is your statement of central concern?
Well, the first thing is to get it out of the shadows, isn't it? And that seems to me to be the whole focus of this session. And I'm just so blown away that Ban Ki-moon and Heinz Fischer have put their weight behind this, because so often when we discuss this issue, it's we as women who are discussing it. We need men discussing it, you know, leaders like the two that we've heard today. So one message would be, would more men come on board and talk about this as a very, very pressing social issue. Now, when you start talking about it, then you need to think, well, what can we do to give it more visibility? When I was a very young member of the New Zealand Parliament, my first year there, 1982, the very first piece of legislation that I was on a committee for was the Domestic Violence Act. Why was that act brought in almost 40 years ago? It was because although obviously violence against an intimate partner was an offence under the Crimes Act of assault, the police and society had an attitude of it's just a domestic. So somehow it didn't matter. And to change that attitude, you needed to change the law to put it in headlines that violence in the home is an assault and it's not okay. One of the social advertising campaigns that my government did back a decade or more ago was a campaign that specifically was called It's Not Okay. And it had people from across the society, across demographics, coming out on screen in these advertisements saying, it's not okay to hit your partner. It's not okay to hit your children. You know, it's not okay. It's just such a simple message. So to get it out of the shadows, get men as well as women talking about it, look at the legislation. Does it make the point that violence in the home is a crime? Assault is a crime anywhere, and it is in the home. And then look at how you can get compelling messages across. Of course, then you need all the things that people have been submitting on with their answers. Apart from awareness raising, you need the services, you need the hotlines, you need many things to happen. It's not one single thing, it's many things that make up a comprehensive approach to this problem, which is a scourge in every society on earth.
Wise words, and get it out of the shadow, I think, is a fantastic motto for us today. And one woman that manages to get it out of the shadow is Angela Cretu. And I do want to give you the floor to give us how do you go about tackling the shadow pandemic and why is it so important?
Thank you, Monica. We have been a company that promoted beauty that goes beyond makeup. Truly a movement for women empowerment. And for more than 100 years, we understood that women appreciate beauty when it comes with dignity. Yes, when it comes with well-being, when it comes with freedom of choice. So we've dedicated our mission for women empowerment. And now in the last years, especially, we are fighting against domestic violence for 15 years because we have such a genuine insight coming from the customers that we work with every day. We have a 5 million strong network of Avon representatives, and they are connected in their micro communities with tens of other women who are sharing their lives and their their aspirations and hopes and also hurdles. So we understood that domestic violence is one of the biggest threats to human rights. We start fighting against that, and for 15 years we worked with NGOs, with legislators, raising the awareness, writing letters to governments, collecting $80 million and donating to frontline services for women. But equally, we understood that this right now, especially in the last year, where everything, this restrictive social environment created even biggest pressure and with exacerbation of cases, we understand we need to go beyond that. And with our partnership, like discussions of today, we also raise the voice of saying, hey, this is not just the government. This is not just some opinion leaders. This is literally everyone needs to speak out and understand that silence hurts. That an attitude like, oh, this is not my problem. I've heard that my friend could be a victim of abuse. That attitude truly kills. So it's our role together as a community to raise our voices. And we do that in Avon with our own employees, with our network of representatives to really speak out stronger than ever and create that awareness, and as well signposting where women can find help.
Angela, it's so important that businesses like yours are as powerful as they can be, because I think it needs more private sector involvement. It needs more enlightened CEOs that actually do exactly the kind of job that you are doing. Thank you so much for that. We will come back to how you're doing it and what Avon has already managed so far. But I do want to shed a light, of course, on UN Women. And Mohammad, we are very happy to have you as part of our panel today, because you have a particular perspective from the inside of UN Women. Tell us, give us your statement of central concern. Why do we have to tackle the shadow pandemic, and how do we do it?
Thank you, Monica. And I would actually argue that it's not the shadow pandemic, it is the pandemic. COVID has hit a year ago. Violence against women has been around for at least 30,000 years. And this is really something that we need to focus on. But unfortunately, crisis comes in and exacerbates this existing pandemic because they are never gender neutral. The outbreak has hit women, at least in the Asia and the Pacific region, particularly hard, especially the most vulnerable, and it's deepening the pre-existing inequalities, exposing vulnerabilities in social, political, and economic systems. Even in normal times, women in Asia and the Pacific experience high level of violence. As the Secretary General and you have mentioned, Monica, globally, at least 1 in 3 women, and it can go up to 1 in 5 women, experience violence at least once in their lifetime. And in the Asia Pacific, it goes even higher. As many as 2 out of 3 women have reported experiences of violence. We've been confronting an increase of violence against women and girls at home. And as our executive director have said, for many women, social distancing during lockdown means that they are trapped in their homes with their own abusers. And to respond to this, we must constantly work to strengthen systems to combat this shadow pandemic or the pandemic, improving access to survivors for services, raising awareness. As you've seen, Monica, on the Mentimeter, awareness came up very, very often, disseminating guidance and recommendations to governments and humanitarian actors, and helping to shape services to respond through technology and through remote support options. And this is not a government responsibility only, but this is where the Angelas of the world come in. It is the responsible businesses, it is a whole of community, a whole of society approach. We must also address the unfortunately growing trend of misogyny and harassment in the digital sphere. Our analysis of social media suggests that COVID lockdowns pushed more people online. Digital platforms and online spaces are being increasingly used to spread sexist, inaccurate, and dangerous rhetoric about women, inciting hatred and potentially provoking violence online and offline. During the lockdowns and quarantines, tweets from India, Indonesia, and the Philippines containing misogynistic language doubled week over week in May, for instance. It's critical to align with governments, development organizations, researchers, businesses, to build the capacity of women to identify, report, and block hateful content, and build social media literacy and countering disinformation. We also need to expand legislation that criminalizes cyber harassment and stalking, which does not exist in some countries. I stop here, Monica, and I go back to you.
Thank you so much, Mohammad. Very important words: awareness, 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 and the cyber dimension that you brought in just now. And I would add, it doesn't only need voices like Angela and Helen and yourself, but also voices like Trisha. Trisha, we are so blessed to have you with us today. You have been through something really incredible, but we are thankful that you are a fighter and you made it. Your voice, she says, is very important. Trisha, tell us, what is your way of how we go about tackling the pandemic?
Thank you. Firstly, at the offset, I apologize for this distraction. I was hoping to go for the SDG pin as an accessory, but I'm stuck with this beautiful, glamorous neck brace instead. But I do want to echo Helen Clark's opening points and just express my gratitude for this important conversation being led by all of you, and just how grateful I am to be amongst all of you. What we don't see, we don't acknowledge, right? So I'm so glad that the focus has been on France, because often when I come, I'm from India, and the first question I often get asked is, what do we do about your men? How do we educate your men to stop harassing women? And of course, we have a huge problem when it comes to domestic violence, sexual abuse in India. But the tragedy is, it is a global pandemic that connects us all. It's not restricted to developing countries, underdeveloped countries. The statistics in France, which I call my second home, is alarming. So I think the few things we need to address, one is that this has been going on. I think a lot of people have said that we are highlighting the cracks in a system that was already prevalent, right? So, and the women and the survivors have been speaking up about this. It's the system that has oppressed and shut down their voices. So it's not that they have been voiceless, it's that the system has actively ignored them or deliberately silenced them. So one is recognizing and acknowledging that this is a huge, grave problem. And we often like to talk about harassers as a stranger in a dark alley. But we don't want to acknowledge that harassers, in most cases, are people we are intimately aware of, people we know. And the second we talk about such harassers, they bracket it into, oh, it's a home issue. There's a militant feminist in France called Caroline Dehas, who does a lot of advice and system building, especially in police stations, on how to address domestic violence cases around France. And when I met her, she told me the first thing these police officers ask her is, how do we ask the women if they've been abused? Because the advice they give the police officers is the second you make contact with a woman, you must ask them, are you being abused at home? Are you safe? And the police officers, mostly men, say, I don't know, how do we ask them? And her brilliant strategy was simple. She tells them, okay, here's an exercise. Get up, stand up. They stand up. She says, now open your mouth and repeat after me. Madam, have you been harassed at home? And they repeat after. And she's like, okay, so your mouth does function. You can't say these words out loud. It's your will to not say it, right? So that's one problem. The fact that we try to pretend like it doesn't exist. Another problem, which I think is the grave situation we need to address with urgency, is the crisis of failed leadership, which is where, I'm heartened that that our colleague from the UN said the buck doesn't stop with government. But the way I see it is, as a member of civil society, I am filling the vacuum of inefficiencies within government. I never want my job as a civil society member to be so good that I replace state apparatus. Let's be honest, the reason why we exist, the reason why civil society exists, is because of inefficiencies within the government systems. You go back to India right now, There was a case in Hathras, the largest state in India, where there was a girl from a lower caste. Much like race is the original sin in America, caste is the original sin in India. She was a girl from a lower caste, a Dalit community, who was allegedly gang raped, and she succumbed to her injuries and died. As a dying testimony, she said, I was assaulted, I was gang raped. And she was gang raped by people from upper communities, upper caste. Her body was taken without her parents' consent and burnt in the middle of the night. And then they said she has not even been raped. Here we saw complicity by the state, where they said, no, she's from the lower caste. Why are you saying she's been raped? We had no statement been put out. In fact, the chief minister of that state said this is a foreign conspiracy trying to make my state look bad. So you see how a woman's body becomes politicized, and she's not even afforded dignity in her death after being subject to the worst kind of harassment. Currently in my country, we have laws that say a husband cannot be charged with raping his wife. Marital rape is illegal in my country. So as a woman, if the rapist is a stranger in a dark alley, I can seek recourse to justice. If the rapist is my ex-husband, I can seek recourse to justice. If the rapist is my husband, is my boyfriend, I can seek recourse to justice. But if my rapist is my husband, I cannot seek recourse to justice. It is not recognized as a crime against my body. So what we must acknowledge is the failure of leadership. And this is where global community plays a huge role. I'm glad that COVID has made us realize talks of borders, talks of walls is not going to address this crisis. Us coming together and recognizing that a health issue in a village, in a faraway continent could affect the entire global community. And violence is a health issue. It's an inherent health issue. It's not a women's issue only. These are cracks in a system that, and what kind of a society are we living in when half the population has a story to share about being abused by someone they're intimately aware of? So I think, to sum it up, one, acknowledging the crisis and failed leadership and doubling down on those leaders who are failing their women, whose responsibility it is. This SDGs call upon us to recognize we are right holders and they are duty bearers. And it's a social contract we have. So no one is doing us any favors. They need to do their job. Two is doubling down on having these uncomfortable conversations and remembering that there are lives beyond the data. When we say 1 out of 3 women, there are lives, they have names. And France does a great job. The militant activists go around, you see across Paris, the walls are plastered with the names of women who they've lost to femicide, because there are names beyond the data. So honoring them, and when I say honoring them, saying, I'm sorry this happened to your body, but I pledge to do everything I can in my capacity to make sure it doesn't get repeated. And all of us recognizing we have a role to play in this system.
Trisha, powerful, absolutely powerful, goosebumps so many times of shock, but also of awe. The question of leadership, I mean, it's the best segue that I can possibly think of as a moderator. Helen, I want to point to you again, because you are chair of the Women Political Leaders Board. So tell us, in this context, how does women leadership affect the policies that Trisha was just now describing that are often lacking?
When I was at the UN Development Programme, we had some very interesting studies which showed that as the proportion of women in the parliaments rose, issues that had previously gone unaddressed came to the fore. And my own experience in New Zealand tells me this, that you get much more attention paid to issues that women want addressed when more women are there to do something about it. Now, I'll give you an example with respect to violence against women and family violence in general in my own country. As I said, we had quite significant social advertising campaigns as part of a many-pronged approach to addressing domestic violence. But I was absolutely thrilled. In the last couple of years, the government led by Jacinda Ardern has put legislation through Parliament that provides for a woman who is fleeing a violent partner to have 10 days paid leave to do it. Because, often when you have to leave with your children, often with the clothes you stand up in, you have nothing. And so the 10 days paid leave while you're perhaps going to the women's refuge or shelter, and then you need time to find your accommodation, get yourself established. So this is seen as a world first to provide this kind of financial support for women. And I really don't think that would have happened without a woman Prime Minister and a very significant proportion of women in the Parliament. And by the way, that proportion has now, in the October elections in New Zealand, gone to just under 50%. I think 48-point-something% of the New Zealand MPs are female. So, you know, what's the space? We will get, you know, increasingly more action on issues women are demanding action on.
Right. I couldn't agree more. We need more women in positions of power, and it will hopefully shift the balance soon. I think that it was a major sign to see Kamala Harris moving into the White House as Vice President of the US. I think that was a great sign. Yeah. Angela, over to you, because you are such a woman in a leadership position, and I would really like to know, Avon and Nature, Natura and Co. is actually your field of your sphere of influence. How do you address exactly that issue in your businesses?
Trisha is absolutely right. It is about leadership, and we all need to take responsibility for the way we shape our world, not just for ourselves, but for our children. And it's clear already, although it's a 30,000, as Mr. Mohammad said, you know, 30,000 pandemic, you know, maybe this year it's our time to really step back, reflect once again at our future. And together, Avon with Natura and Co., we said to ourselves that it's not worth just to want to be the best beauty company in our industry. It's really, how can we be the best beauty company for the world? Creating a sustainable agenda that really serves people and planet before profit. I think that, to me personally as a leader, this is what creates a meaningful purpose and a very different engagement with the company that I represent. And now back to the issue that we want to tackle together and how we can address it. We need to understand that only 40% of women do report the brutality that they are going through. And out of this, only 10% would go to the police. So one cannot stop asking, you know, what happens with the rest? Who hears of their pain? Who is supporting them? We, in our communities, when we hear these stories, they say, where to go? My mom would not get me back, and I have no financial means to raise my children, and I will lose access to my children. So I think it's important for us as businesses, together in partnership with governments, to find different ways to engage women with work and earning opportunity that go beyond just the fixed, you know, regimen of work choices that are 9 to 5. Create a much more flexible way for women to create a meaningful earning for themselves. Because once they have the financial freedom, they have the freedom of choice. Mm-hmm. They can leave their abuser if they have a solid financial stream. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that it comes with education. We can do that preventively together, but equally it comes to the earning opportunity. And this is where I see a business like myself. There are other businesses there like Etsy who are encouraging the women entrepreneurship, and other businesses that really create this kind of flexible earning opportunity wherein they can make a financial means in their own right and manage their life. And I think this is one very big step forward that we can do, all of us together. Then, of course, we talked about awareness, we talked about campaigns, and internally as well, and this is the last thing I would also ask and call like a challenge to our businesses, is all of us go against our own community of employees and train them to read the signs, to support, and then as well protect our own communities with leave, like some governments are doing. We need to do it in our own companies. Give them the right access to support, and as well the right leave of absence, so they can restabilize, yes, their living environment.
And Angela, can I ask a short follow-on question? Because how do you do that in Avon? Like, do you give, like, are there online classes? Do they need to do a course, or is it trainers that go in and tell the staff? How do you do it?
Yeah, so for our employees, we do have a partnership with Vital Voices. We all know this global organization, and we've worked with them for so many years, and we are doing trainings for our own employees.
Okay.
To really help them, first of all, feel their own, the meaningful purpose that they are all part of, but as well make them activists, become activists for the cause. And then as well for our community of 5 million representatives, we continue with our own trainers. And with the dedicated limited editions, you know, we collect funds, we engage them in the micro communities that they serve, you know, to raise the awareness and directly connect their friends with the support services that we do have currently in every country where we operate.
Fascinating, really fascinating. Mohammad, I want to come back to you. And you gave us already a list of things that need to be done, given your perspective and your vantage point. Yet this list that needs to be done is policy-wise, very high up there. But I do know you personally are a champion of this issue. You personally are a man who stands up for this. Can you tell us more about the he for she, the male perspective in the Asia Pacific when it comes to that issue? What needs to be done more?
Thank you, Monica. And I really do see it as it's not only men who are exercising violence against women, it's patriarchy. And patriarchy is still very much alive in the minds of men, and unfortunately many women as well. And when we started doing the work on and with men and boys, and I started in the Middle East and North Africa before I go to the Asia Pacific, we did focus group discussions amongst many of our women in the region, and the responses to the following questions were a bit shocking. When we asked these questions, what does a man or manhood means? And then you get answers like, if my husband doesn't beat me, he doesn't love me. Or if my father doesn't send my younger brother with me to the mall, he doesn't care about me. Or if my brother prevents me from going out of the house, he's a sissy, he's not a man. And this brings us back to working on awareness and changing the behavior of and the way we think as societies and as communities. And this will not happen unless we tackle four things. The first is education. And in many parts of the world, you still find sentences in education saying, my father goes to the field to work, my mother stays at home to cook. Or I play soccer with my friends and my sister stays at home to help my mother. So education. We need to work with responsible media to disseminate messages and images of women empowerment, not the stereotypical images anymore, not the Cinderellas and the Snow Whites of the world. We need to tackle the cultural and folkloric narrative of many of the societies where it's always the man hero coming to save the society. And finally, the big elephant in the room that many of us do not want to talk about, which is the religious narrative. And that is a discourse that we also worked on as UN Women, not trying to come up with a new religious kind of statements, but to look at the religious interpretation from a women's perspective, from a gender-sensitive perspective. And we did unveil a lot of rights that were not necessarily known to common people in the Islamic faith, especially in the Sunni. And we're moving as we progress into the Shiites, and then we're going into the different Christian schools of faith to look into that as well. Working with men and boys is essential, and we cannot do without, because whether we like it or not, we still live together in one society. And unfortunately, the decision making in the world is still, unfortunately, in the majority hands of men. And this is where we need to sensitize. And the key message is, as the Secretary General said, violence is not an issue against women only. We all pay the price. We all pay the price as members of the society, as people who would like to see a better tomorrow. We will never reach a better tomorrow without ending the violence against women, but also reaching the gender equality at large. I stop here and back to you, Monica.
Yeah, Mohammad, I couldn't agree more. Your 4 points, I jotted it down. I hope many did. Trisha, I do want to hear more from you, because SheSays is very inspirational. And I'm wondering, how would you advise others to start maybe something similar to really cause major revolution in the systems? What inspired you to do it? How can you instill this spark in others? And I know you did that already many times. So Trisha, more from you.
Thank you. You know, just one thing, it's not on the historically oppressed to make a case for their humanity and advocate for themselves. I think it's so important for us to keep highlighting that. When we started, it's not like, you know, we invented some ingenious idea. All we did is pledge to be need-driven and not solely cause-driven. And by that, what I mean is I went on ground and I tried to figure out, okay, these are the laws that I'm promised as a lawyer. These are the laws that my constitution says I have access to. But on ground, what is happening? You know, in America, they celebrate Juneteenth, which is basically when they realize that slavery has been abolished. So it's really important to know who has access to the laws. So what we did is go on ground and do audits and surveys and try and figure out how do we fill in the vacuum and where do we need to come in place. Very often our work is just accompanying a survivor to the police station, to the hospital. And, you know, and when the hospital tries to charge a 4-year-old child who's been raped with the fees for a pelvic x-ray, telling them that no, the law of the land says that this must be provided free of cost. So you cannot ask a survivor for the money for this. So the radical act of simply telling the truth and speaking truth to powerful institutions is being seen as revolutionary. And here again, we double down on saying this idea, this narrative of an ideal victim, right? And it's not solely a narrative that's put on in countries like mine. It's everywhere of what was she wearing? What did she do just before the assault that may have warranted her being assaulted? Was she not educated enough? Perhaps if she was educated, she would know how to report it. All of these things. So again, the onus of putting this blame on the historically oppressed to make a case for their humanity. And also when they speak up, then being like, you're being too aggressive. I wish you would speak more politely about your oppression. I wish you would make us less uncomfortable with the truth of what your body has been subject to, so we could provide you access to justice. Because you screaming and shouting and saying this is happening to my body is too aggressive. Not the act that has happened to your body, but the way that we're just saying it. So the politeness, the onus of politeness, the civility, the burden that we put on the victims and survivors, as opposed to looking at the system that's failing them and the oppressor, needs to be addressed. And this is why, again, respectfully, I understand, you know, patriarchy is a problem, but it's a system. Imagine, I once had a marital rape survivor reach out to me and tell me that her mother told her, after she kept telling her mother, I'm being raped by my husband, I need to get out. Her mother kept telling her to adjust, adjust, adjust. And one day when she told her, I cannot adjust, her mother looks at her and says, you think every time your father is having sex with me, it's consensual. I just don't call it what you're calling it. And the girl broke down. She told me she felt weak, not because of the abuse, but because she wasn't strong enough to deal with the abuse like her mother was. Till the time she didn't hear me say marital rape is a crime and consent must always be accounted for. So I'm sorry, it's not just, I understand it's patriarchy, but we have to understand that it's an unfair burden on women, on gender non-conforming people. And to put the onus on everyone saying we need institutional reform, sure, but there are clear lapses in the system that benefit those closest to positions of power, which historically is men, straight men, in any society. With regards to what can we do, listen, it's clear. There are people speaking out. I've always been so heartened by Helen Clark's leadership. You know, I follow you on Twitter and I see her formidable leadership of calling it out, of pinning the tail of the donkey, you know, which a lot of leaders are afraid to do. And Helen Clark says it as it is. She doesn't shy away from saying, this is what's wrong, this is what's right, because till the time you don't pin it out. And you know, the significance of having Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, who doesn't hold on to the comfort of diplomacy and say, diplomacy warrants of me to not say the truth, because I must have everyone on this table. I must make sure the table is big enough to have everyone on the table. That means I will have Mohammed bin Salman on the table. I will have Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the table. I will have Duterte on the table, and not acknowledge what is happening to the women in your country. No, we need leadership like Helen Clark that acknowledges diplomacy, calls upon also acknowledging what is happening to the women in your country. Who's accounting for their dignity? Who's accounting for their lives? I'm so glad Angela spoke about, you know, dignity and financial empowerment, because that truly is a lot of the work that we do. When we tell women, how do we get out of abusive situations? The two things we always ask for: therapy. We pay for therapy and tell them you must speak to a therapist to be mentally strong. And second, securing their finances. And the last thing, I'll sum this up with saying again, the current times we're in, it's times of grave crisis. Okay. You cannot, it's no more acceptable for heads of international organizations to sanitize image of world leaders and give awards to world leaders during times when they are inflicting human rights violations on their citizens. What is the message you are sending to our people, to the women in my country, when the largest organization in the world gives an award to my leader who has a history of violence against women, against minorities, against people of color? What is the message you're sending when you sanitize images of these leaders? So please, what we ask for you is that the survivors are doing God's work by speaking up about the injustice that they're going through. They're challenging norms and saying, this is what's happening to my body. They're going against cultural taboos and saying, I was inflicted with this injury and I asked for justice. The least we can do is be remotely as brave as the survivors of domestic violence and listen to them and provide them the help that they need, because they know the cultural context that they need the help within. And they will tell you that. And final statement I'll sum it up with is Nadia Murad. She made a statement. She said, hope is dangerous. Hope has an expiration date. Hope requires action. So we need to act. And if we need to know how to act, follow the leadership of women like Angela, like Helen Clark, follow the leadership of survivors who are showing the best of humanity after suffering through the worst of humanity.
Trisha, who wants to react to this? I'm looking at Helen, I'm looking at Angela, I'm looking at Mohammed. Who wants to react to these powerful words? You're still muted, Helen Clark.
Myself. One thing I'd like to pick up from what Trisha said is we need to be guided by women too as to what they need. What do they need from policymakers? What do they need from decision makers? I'm minded of a visit I made to Haiti at some point after the devastating earthquake there, which was early 2010. And my organization was involved in the recovery process of how you rebuild neighborhoods. And they launched what was called participatory planning. And the women given voice in that process said, you know what? When we rebuild here, I want a street light on that corner, because every time I walk past that corner, I'm terrified that I'm going to be assaulted because it's dark. I need lights there. And one of the Build Back Better things was to put up the solar light in a country where power wasn't terribly well, reliable, shall we say, so that the woman had just that basic security that they were going to be walking in bright light and not around a dark corner and being assaulted. So it's a simple example of how, you know, ask for what the ideas are. What do you need that would help make, you know, your life safer? I think that's really important.
Life-saving. Any other reactions, Angela? Mohammed? Yes, Mohammed, I saw your hand up. So sorry, Angela, you will be the last. Okay, so Mohammed first, and then you're gonna. Mohammed.
No, in short, I fully agree with Trisha's intervention. patriarchy is alive and well, and the ones who are exercising this patriarchy are definitely men who are in power. As you rightly said, Trisha, and I cannot deny that, those who are the ones who are closest to the decision making, those are the ones who are applying decisions in the public and the private spheres, and we really need to tackle this head on. And it reminded me, one of the when you were talking about rape and harassment, the question that is most globally asked in any police station when a woman goes to report a harassment case globally, what have you done to deserve that? So all of a sudden, the responsibility, as you rightly said, Trisha, lies on the survivor or the victim to prove that she is not the perpetrator here, but the victim. And this comes from the first step in the whole law enforcement process, which is going to the police station. So apparently there is a long way for us to go from sensitizing the system that you're talking about, Trisha, and this system is still very much governed by how patriarchy is governing us. So we definitely need to sensitize this system. Back to you, Monica.
Agreed, actually, to Angela.
Yeah, so yes, indeed, these social norms are very difficult to change. I mean, it's still part of my generation. I grew up in a society where it was said that physical punishment for a misbehaving child is coming from heaven, where a woman was supposed to walk behind the man. And this is part of still my upbringing, so not too long ago. But things are changing. That would be inconceivable today. And this is just, a few decades after. So I would say the world continues to change. Where we really need to accelerate this social norms transformation, revolution almost, is in the way we raise our children. Remember, we are the mothers of the boys who are going to be partners and husbands and fathers. And we need to teach them that an equal world for women, it's a better world for all. And equality, the principle of equality, access to education, to financial, so everything that we talked about today.
So much plays into.
Yes.
True, so true. I do want to do one last lightning round and ask each and every speaker to leave us with the one key sentence, the one message. But before we do that, I would like to ask our audience already, please type in your questions into the chat. We want to give the opportunity to you to ask questions to our distinct panel. But I do want to have a lightning round of what shall we leave the discussion with? What is the one message that we really should retain? And Helen Clark, I would like to start with you with that one for closing the official panel discussion.
Well, I think the key message, and let me put in the COVID context, is that we have to have gender responsive responses. And that means women have to be part of the decision making, they have to be engaged, they have to be involved. When you look at who's making the decisions in the context of this pandemic, 70% of the global health workforce is women. You don't see too many women at the front table of the decisions. But I think if we want gender sensitive responses, we need more women decision makers. We need this just to be a lens that everything is looked through. As a matter of interest, I had a look at what my own government, which obviously has a woman prime minister and many women ministers and parliamentarians, how the COVID response has dealt with these kinds of issues. Right up there on the government website on COVID is pages on family and sexual violence prevention. Here are the helplines. Here's where you go. And I thought, that's fantastic. Would this have happened 30 years ago? Probably not. So gender sensitive responses and engaging and involving women in designing what's required.
Wonderful. Let me put the word to you, Mohammad. What would be your one statement you want us to remember?
Similarly to Helen, without women at the forefront of the decision-making process, unfortunately, we will continue to have more pandemics, and we will not build back better, and we will not reach a better tomorrow. We need women out there at the forefront of the decision-making at all levels, from the political to every other space, public and private.
Very wisely put. Angela, what would be your statement?
Speak out, act out, silence hurts. We are having almost 100 people in the audience today. All of you, I'm sure you have social media, LinkedIn, connected with other hundreds, maybe thousands. Please go out even today and express your view, share your values. I think together we can truly transform the world.
Beautiful. Trisha, over to you.
I just want to, thank Ban Ki-moon's leadership, because I want to acknowledge that 16 days of Orange the World, as well as the SDGs, would not have taken this shape had it not been for his excellent leadership. With regards to the final message, when member states adopted the SDGs, they made a pledge to leave no one behind. I think if we live in that truth, we will recognize that we're leaving far too many people behind. And it's costing lives, it's costing loss to economy, it's costing loss to our progress as a society as a whole. So be impatient and unapologetic when advocating for the global community to leave no more people behind, and making sure that a woman's agency for her body is celebrated.
Wonderful. After these inspirational words, I want to turn back to the audience, because I want to know from you. First of all, maybe you have a question, but secondly, I want you to go back to your mobile phones, because we have one more Menti slide, and we want to know from you, how do you think what can we individually do to tackle the shadow pandemic? What can each and every one of us do to tackle the shadow pandemic? And I see that already 5 answers are in. So for those who are not yet online, please do go online. It's on the www.menti.com. The code is 8459221. And the suggestions are solidarity and empowerment, speak out, see something, say something. Education of boys and girls respecting each other. It's absolutely key. We have heard it a couple of times. Make gender equality a normal. Shout about support, talk to friends and family, speak out, pay attention, raise your voices, raise our voices. Make gender equality a normal subject in conversation. Fight patriarchy. And educate men and boys, that comes up a couple of times. Yes, share it on social media. I like that one. We didn't have that before. Yes, education. Call it violence of man. Spread the message. Be present, pay attention, act. Very simple 3-letter word, true, act. Looking at Uganda, women are in parliament and formally in government, but extreme positions in COVID times created by behavior of police. Oof. Training of youth is okay, but only in private, not in public schools. So there is lots of need for more action. Make gender equality a normal. We had that already. I see 30 of you participated in that. And maybe if we have time, I will hopefully get more of you. 31. Economic empowerment of women. We had that discussion briefly about the moment finances are given to a woman, she becomes freer and hence less dependent on the structures. Use your voice, talk, promote awareness, post social media. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your active support in this. I do have no question in the chat box, but of course, being me, I do have a last question to our panel still. I do want to know, what was your individual story that triggered you to involve in violence against women? Why did you do it? Trisha, I see that you are on, but I can't still hear your sound.
Sorry, was that directed to me?
It was directed to all of you. I do want to hear a last statement by you that tells us why you individually engaged in that matter.
You know, this is a question I dodged a lot in the beginning of my career, because the narrative was victim strikes back. And I really took so much time to make sure the solutions that SheSays, my organization, was proposing was not being proposed from the thought of, oh, I wish I had this. So I have been a survivor of child sexual abuse. And it was just a cause that deeply affected me. But the more I learned and the more I unlearned, I realized there's not one woman or gender non-conforming person I know. There's not one man I know who does not know someone who's been a survivor of sexual abuse or child sexual abuse or some sort of gender-based discrimination. And when we're dealing with a pandemic of this level, of this magnitude, my question is, why aren't you involved in this movement to end this? You know, it seems like the most logical thing to address this issue. You want to talk about climate crisis, the two most cost-effective solutions to address climate crisis: investing in young girls' education and sexual and reproductive health care rights. Economy gets boosted, the more women are empowered. You know, the state of a country gets better, the more a girl studies. So when all roads lead back to gender equality, and when this is such a huge barrier in the process of equality, my question is, you know, why aren't you? It's like almost a dummy question. It's like, is black not black and white not white? Then why aren't you fighting for gender equality and to end violence against women?
Wonderful. Why are we not yet all a part of it? And I think we are, fortunately. Mohammad, over to you. What is your personal motivation?
It's the deep feel of injustice. I grew up in a gender equal household where my great-grandfather has sold his land to send my grandmother to get an education along with her brothers. And that trickled down to me. It's only when I left that private sphere into the world that I discovered that life is not like that. And I grew with that sense of deep injustice that I see every day. And I wanted to do something about it.
Thank you. Angela, your motivation.
I have been blessed in my last 22 years by the side of Avon, you know, to work in countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia, US, South Africa, Middle East, Central Eastern Europe. And I just realized, you know, I learned with humility that there is no us and them, that in each and every of those countries, from the very developed ones to the still emerging, you know, ones from the economical standpoint, women share the same pain and had same hopes. And I've learned so much from all these communities and being in their houses. And it turned to be my life mission. It turned to be the way I chose, you know, to live and dedicate my effort, yes, to this amazing, very strong purpose. And hopefully during my lifetime, it would be, you know, no longer an issue.
Your words in everyone's ear. Helen Clark.
For me, the motivation came from being one of a very, very small number of women in the New Zealand Parliament. 9% of the Parliament was female when I was elected in 1981. And women came to this little group of 8 of us for support on the wide range of issues that hadn't really had a decent airing in public life. And so, you know, inevitably as a local community member of Parliament, you heard from the women's refuges, you heard from the women who needed the services, and you picked up the issues. You had a duty as one of the very few women to be there for those women and stand with them. So it's really been, you know, going back to the beginnings of my parliamentary career, which was close to 40 decades ago. I've just, you know, always been taking on these issues, being a sounding board, helping people advocate and put their case. And I guess I'll just keep doing that, whatever capacity I'm in.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, that leads me to the closure of our session today. It's been enlightening, it's been touching, and I do want to appeal to all of you. Let's get this pandemic out of the shadow and let's leave no one behind. Thank you for all your hard work on this one. I thank the panel. Big love to all of you. and much power. Let's continue the dialogue and fight. Thank you.
Thank you.